One thing Ross mentioned, and I want to discuss, is rematches in college football. I don't mind the rematch as much as maybe others. I think that there was something great about college football that you didn't used to have rematches. And I would go back to last year's Michigan-Ohio State game as conceivably like one day one of these people, you know how they write books, sports books, and it's always the last. Like they figured out that the word the last is how you sell a sports book somewhere in the market. I don't know why, but it's always the last this, the last that.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the last? Because it was like, I'm going to put a little asterisk on it because it's not true, but the last being the last time two teams met in the regular season and it was truly a knockout game. Now, the year before was supposed to be the knockout game, and Ohio State made the playoff anyway,
right?
And was one field goal from getting TC, right? So the playoff had already kind of taken that away. The way the conference championships had already taken that away. We'd already started losing that, but there is a bit of nostalgia in college football, and I get why. That game, and Pat, you and I were there. We've covered a lot of big games. Like that was one of the most intense situations, like games I've ever been at. The stakes were so enormous, and part of it was Connor Stallions and Harbaugh suspended, and the pressure on Ryan Day, but it was like those old like wrestling matches where they'd like go up on a ladder, like a ladder mat, like someone was going off the ladder. And there was going to be no recovery. There was no like, it was just everyone's heart was like, it was the tension for those of us who are not a fan of either team. Like you could feel the tension, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
like walking to the stadium, you could feel it.
Even talking to the like you go in the press box, hey, good to see you. Like you see some people, from each school, and they're just like, they've got like this look in their eye. I haven't slept all week. I'm butterflies, gotta win this game. And it's like, whoa, like this is tense. That is going to go away even more than it already kind of has gone away. Because again, we were a year before, we had that tension in Ohio Stadium. Michigan wins the game. Ohio State makes the playoff anyway and was so close to winning a national title. They would have been like, what happened? I don't remember that game.
Yeah.
But is the rematch, is it in our heads? Because the NFL has rematches. First off, a lot of teams play twice a year. Play everyone in your division twice a year. Playoff rematches happen. On occasion, you even get the last week and then the next week. That's the one I want to avoid. What I want to avoid really is Ohio State, Michigan playing, and then you're already locked in to play again the next week. That is the disaster, not the playoff. But is a rematch that bad? Was Georgia, Alabama bad because it was a rematch? Was Alabama LSU game in the BCS championship was bad because it was a bad game? It was boring for anyone who wasn't an Alabama fan, I guess. But is the rematch really that bad of a thing?
I mean, I'm with you. I don't think it's such a bad thing that you gerrymander the bracket to avoid it necessarily. I mean, if there's truly like a kind of a toss-up where a 7 seed versus an 8 seed, and if you move the 8 to 7, then they're not playing a 9 that they had just played 2 weeks ago or whatever. Okay, but I don't think it will diminish the playoff. And I agree. Yeah, like the rematch of Georgia Alabama was fascinating. I thought for the national championship after they had played in the SEC title game, that was really interesting, and I think people will be able to latch onto that as well. You don't want the Iron Bowl to be played November 26th, then played again in an SEC championship game wherein there are no longer divisions. You don't want an SEC, a Georgia LSU SEC championship game then to get retread as a semifinal. But I don't. You're going to have to break some eggs to make this omelet, and I think the omelet's going to be good. And so I would not let rematches necessarily, impact the way you put together a playoff just to avoid them. That's my take.
Well, Pat mentioned the Iron Bowl. I think last week, the athletic director at Auburn and the athletic director at Alabama were on like a panel at a maybe a sports writing kind of annual meeting in Alabama. And John Cohen, the Auburn AD, mentioned how there's a possibility to have the Iron Bowl played 3 times in a season, right? Play the Iron Bowl, play in the rematch in the SEC championship game, as Pat just alluded to, and then play in the CFP. I mean, the odds of that happening are probably very small, but it's a possibility. I don't know how great that would be for the game in general. We're, as Dan said, like we're not used to a lot of rematches in college sports, and I think, and specifically in college football, and that I think that's what makes, partly at least, what makes the regular season great and valuable and stuff, is that you maybe only get that one meeting, and there's something special about that. Like, I think I went on a rant last week about the NFL expanding the regular season, and I think the gist of the rant was, can we just stop, right? Can we just stop expanding everything? Because the more you add on, the more waters down the product in general. So I think I feel that way about it. I think they're just like the NCAA basketball tournament has their policy of no conference games, right, Pat? The first 2 games, the first round,
the Sweet 16,
to
the Sweet 16, yeah. Like they try to avoid the conference games. The CFP, they don't show any possibility in doing that. And I was, I crunched the numbers for that story a couple months ago, and I was pulling up the stats and stuff. 7 times in the last 10 years, you would have had a first round rematch in the CFP. Basically, once a year, you would have had
7 and 10 years.
First round.
Is that what you had?
7 out of 10 years. Yeah. So you had 1 year. You had 2 first round rematches, and then 4 years you had 0, and then 6 years you'd have 1, I believe, or 5 years you'd have 1, and that's kind of how that fell.
So here's how I look at it, and I don't know. We'll see how this plays out. But I don't think the rematch is the problem as long as you don't know the rematch is coming the first time around. I think it's great at the end of a season, in theory, when like Michigan, Ohio State were playing last year, and you said one of your seasons is over. But unless you're playing at the very end, that really is hard to prove. It's going to, like, you don't go into Red River, say early October, and say your season is over. If Texas beats Oklahoma, the Sooners are done. They cannot accomplish any of their goals because there's too many games to play. Now, you can say, I'm going to taunt you on the way out, and your drunken, hungover, sunburnt self is going to have to drive back to Lawton in misery, and I'm going to enjoy every second of that. Fine. That will still be there. I think it's that end of the year game when you have that opportunity. But let's say you have that. We beat you, go home, all this stuff, all that excitement. Texas beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma beat Texas. And then they meet up. You have no way to be like, oh, well, you know what? We're going to see them again January 1st. Like, you don't know that. So I think that moment of emotion, I'm more concerned about the divisionless conference championship game. If Michigan and Ohio State last year, this is 1 year, they knew no matter who lost and who won, we're going to play a week later in Indianapolis, it would have ruined the entire thing.
Yeah.
Even if you say we were just going to go into the playoffs and maybe play again, it would take a little bit of the heat out of that. There's no question. But again, we've always had that. Ohio State made it the year before. but you don't know you're going to be automatically matched up. There's still, even with just 12 teams or 14 in a couple years, it's still kind of a roll of the dice. And you're like, oh, all right, Selection Sunday, we're going to play again. You don't, as long as you don't know in the first game, I don't think it takes too much away.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, I said that I think that they should probably consider moving Ohio State, Michigan off the end of the regular season, because seems like a pretty darn good chance those two could play back-to-back weeks. Not maybe even regularly. We'll see how things shake out. And
bizarre,
wouldn't it?
How would you even play that game? Would you
I don't know. I mean, do you sandbag the game? Do I mean,
everyone's
do you go with the total vanilla.
Talk about stolen signals. Plan? I mean, now a week later, you got to have oh my God.
Yeah. And that would be so antithetical to
tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, Ohio State's coming to the big house, and guess what? We're gonna play the backups. Like, what? Could you imagine the home crowd watching your team sandbag that game so you then could go to Indy and play them for real the next week?
I don't know. Would the coach do that?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can.
Might be fired on Monday, and they have a Brian Day did that. Sharon Moore just going, I'm just not going to try in my first Ohio State Michigan game. We'll go, because then you get blown out the next week. I don't even know how you do this.
Right.
The issue here, I think the threat, and I think that would be absolutely horrible. I don't overreact to a whole lot, but this would be absolutely horrible. And the threat is not at the playoff level; it's at the conference level. And they got so tired of the Big Ten. I don't know the division. Were the divisions that bad? I can't stand the conference championship game. So
no, the games were terrible. The divisions were bad just because they ended up so imbalanced. There was a very rare, especially in the Big Ten, rarely did you have a good championship game. I hate we're preaching to the choir there. I hate conference championship games and have for 20 years.
Well, there soon could be going away, or at least some of them. I was, while you guys were going back and forth, I was trying to come up with those 7 rematches of what they were the last 10 years in the CFP. I think I have some of them. Well, we talked about one of them was the Egg Bowl would be a rematch. The Mississippi State Ole Miss would have been a playoff, a first round.
Where would the game? That was going to be in Oxford, right?
It was going to be. I think it was going to be in Starkville.
Oh yeah. So the first one was in Oxford.
Starkville. It was 8-9 seed.
The first one was in Oxford, right? I went to that. I think.
I believe that's right. And then another one would have been TCU, Kansas State. There are a couple of Big 12. TCU, Kansas State, Baylor, Oklahoma State. TCU, Kansas State would have been 2014, I think. Baylor, Oklahoma State would have been just a couple of years ago, I believe. Ohio State, Penn State would have been a first-round rematch. And then there's a couple of Florida first-round rematches. Florida and Auburn would have played in a first-round game after playing the regular season. And Georgia and Florida, of course. Ooh. So there are a couple of there's 3 really big kind of rival games, I guess you could say, that would have been in a first-round rematch, which was the Egg Bowl, Georgia, Florida, and Ohio State, Penn State. Those would have been I think
as long as you didn't know. Let me take Oregon this year. Oregon, I think, is a top 5 team. I think we all probably agree on that, and have a very good chance of making the playoff. They get Ohio State at home on October 12th, and they are at Michigan on November 2nd. If we're going to look at the preseason, no offense to Penn State, who I think should be in this mix too, but if we're looking at who's the most likely top 2 teams that will meet in Indianapolis or again in a playoff, it would be Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, depending on quarterback play, right? They're probably the 3 favorites. No offense, Penn State, Wisconsin, some of the others that could get in there. But I don't think that the excitement level on October 12th, if they play when Ohio State comes to Autzen, will be limited in any way because there's a chance they will meet again.
No.
And then when they do meet again, now the Big Ten championship game might be, you're still playing for seeding, but it's not, whatever. But if then you meet again on whatever date, you know, in the let's say it's a Big Ten versus Big Ten Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
The bit of that would be so significant. So,
yeah. Well, you know what? And as a matter of fact, we saw it last year in the Pac-12 when Oregon and Washington played a great game in October and then played again in the conference championship game. And you could kind of see it coming, but I didn't. I mean,
I was jacked up for that game.
Big time, exciting. Yeah. Yeah. 2 big time, exciting games. So you're right that I think if we aren't looking at those back-to-back, you know, where one game almost literally doesn't mean anything sort of scenarios, those are bad, but other scenarios are not catastrophic.
Yeah.